Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. And today we're going to be taking a look at the latest of the 7000 series graphics cards from AMD, which is the 7770. So all the sevens on this one, quite a mouthful. Now there's a few things that I kind of need to say about this. Now this is the first reference card to be available with a stock clock of 1 gigahertz. So it's obviously like the very basic one. If they do overclock versions and stuff, it will be beyond this, but it's the first one to ever come straight from the manufacturer with a reference clock of 1 gigahertz. Now I do need to kind of say that for argument's sake, this at 1 gigahertz and then like the 7950 at 1 gigahertz. Obviously the 7950 would be quicker because it's different architectures. You can never mix up and just think that because one's running at a gig, and say for argument's sake even the 7950 at 800 megahertz, the 7950 would obviously be quicker. It's not just about the core speed, it's obviously about the architecture and stuff like that. It's a bit like kind of saying do you know what I mean? One processor at 4 gigahertz, like a P4 would be as quick as like a Sandy Bridge 2600K or 2500K at 4 gigahertz would be running the same speed. They'd be running the same core speed, but they won't necessarily be as efficient and doing as many kind of, as quick when it comes to benchmarks and stuff like that. So that side of things is a little bit more complicated. Now this out the box, they're going to be coming in the shops around the £130 mark, which is kind of, I think, a little bit expensive. And one of the things that I'm going to be showing you in the video is I'm going to be comparing this to the one of the older models at the 6850. Now I know it's kind of like a range up because obviously we will be getting the 7800 series cards later on. But they're so evenly priced, or to the point now where you can actually get a 6850 for like 100, maybe £110. I just wanted to show you that sometimes with cards like this, you may be better buying one of the older generation cards, but a little bit further up the range, than just sticking with whatever the very latest thing is. So I'm going to show you the benchmarks, and then I'll go through it all and explain why in the conclusion at the end. So now I'm going to show you the overclock that you can get out of this, and then we'll move on to our 3D Mark and do some game benchmarks as well. Right then peeps, just to give you a quick look at the overclock and overclocking. None of the overclocking software supports voltage control on this yet. We don't know whether it will be later, but we'd kind of expect it to be. But anyway, if you go to Catalyst Control Center, all I've done is change the power control settings at the bottom and moved it up to 20%. And then at the top you can see the core options. It goes up to 1200, but I found it a little bit unstable up there, so we've settled at 1150 megahertz on the core. And then the memory's maxed out to 1250. Now please do bear in mind, just because it's at 1150 megahertz, this is still slower at stock than, for argument's sake, a 7950, which is like 900 megahertz, 800 megahertz on the core. Don't confuse the fact that just because the megahertz, the core speed is higher, that's going to be, quicker than something with a lower core speed. You can only really say that when quite literally it's the same graphics processor in it. Anyway, still a very healthy overclock there, but then again it does start at 1000 from the starters, because obviously, as I've said before, it's the first reference graphics card to come out with a reference clock of a gigahertz. But anyway, let's move on now to some 3D Mark runs. Right then peeps, first of the 3D Mark runs, and we've got 3D Mark 11. On the left hand side, 3552, that is the stock score for the 7770. And I thought for this review that on the right hand side we would compare it to the old 6850. Mainly because of like price comparisons and stuff like that, and just to kind of kind of cement a point about that these are quite strangely, you know, with the prices and everything. But anyway, we'll get to this more in the conclusion. But anyway, the 6850 scored 3,861. So the 6850, being cheaper, was still faster. What I'm going to do now is move on, and we'll do 3D Mark 11 Xcors. Swiftly on to 3D Mark 11 Xcors. On the left, the 7770 is 1107, and on the right, the 6850 is 1211. So a good solid 100 points in front there. Moving swiftly on to 3D Mark Vantage. The 7770 scores 16,337. And the 6850 scores 15,518. One thing I should say with this though is if you look at the CPU score, you can see that the CPU score is vastly different, and that was because the 6850 was actually tested on the old system. So in Vantage, which is more CPU weighted, this will be the places that it pulls in front. But anyway, let's stop here and we'll move on to the 3D Mark Vantage Xcor. Right then peeps, on to 3D Mark Vantage X. The 7770 scored 6,669 and the 6850 scored 6,485. This just solidifying the point that the newer bench rig CPU is much more efficient. But then again, we're looking at the difference between a 3960X and a i7-950, so a fair old leap. But that again just goes to show, you know, the difference in how good the 6850 is compared, really. But anyway, I think it's time now that we move on and look at some gaming results. Right then peeps, on to some gameplay. This is Battlefield 3, completely maxed out, 1920 by 1080. Top left hand corner of the screen, before everyone starts to ask, is Afterburner. Anyone that you see in the comments asking what it is, tell them they're a noob. Right, you can see that we've got the GPU temperature, 65 degrees, GPU usage, 99%, and then 33% is the fan speed. Then you can see the video memory, 970 megabyte, and then last but not least, the actual frames per second, 33 frames per second. See, it's just gone down to about 20 there, so it's worth, the frames per second is worth watching, but obviously there is a lot of information out there for you to be able to see with the card. One thing I will say though is that even when the frames per second dips, it's not perfect, but it's still playable. Some games when the frames per second gets down this low, you can practically, do you know what I mean, it's just unplayable and you can't do anything, but this is still relatively fluid. Not meant to be giving him a blowjob, Straubs. Gobble, gobble, gobble. I want a turkey job. What are you giving me that funny look for? What noise does turkeys make? Gobble, gobble, gobble. Dear, oh dear. Sorry, but whenever I see these guns on these type of games, all I want to do is go. Maybe that's just me.
I think it is.
And on this note, we will end here and move on to some Crysis II gameplay. Right then guys, on to Metro 2033. You may be a little confused as why I've said that rather than Crysis, but the deauthorization tool on Crysis still isn't working properly. And I just realised that the activations have gone again, so I've had to contact EA support, which is slow at best. Every time I change a graphics card, I use an authorization up. So yeah, joys of doing stuff like this. I sometimes wish I'd borrowed a version off the internet for what I use it for, to be perfectly honest with you. But anyway, yeah, just moving on to Metro. You can see that the graphics temperature, it's been sat at idle for quite a bit. You'll see that creep up, but it's currently 52 degrees. 99% graphics card usage, 21% on the fans, 970 megabyte on the memory usage, and then the frames per second is quite low, dancing around between 16 and 17 frames per second. Really, if you were going to play this game with this rig, you would really have to turn some of the settings down. Probably best just to turn the anti-aliasing off, and it'd probably run a lot better. But anyway, this is the end of this one, because this is where we always quit it. So it's now time to move on to the conclusion. Right then peeps, we'll start off with the award and we'll move on from there onwards. And surprisingly, because I don't normally do these when it comes to videos, it's going to get a bronze award. And you may be thinking to yourself, why don't I do bronze award videos? Well, I can't make videos about everything. So generally, the videos that I make do tend to be gold or silver a lot, because obviously they're the things that you guys are going to watch. Or unless something's really bad, and then I know you'll watch it because I'm going off on one about it. But the fact of the matter is I can't make videos about everything. So sometimes the kind of mediocre stuff, which, let's face it, doesn't really get watched or searched for, I don't bother making videos for. So that's why there's sometimes a tendency not to see the bronze award appearing very much. But with this, it's definitely a bronze award. And why? Well, to be perfectly honest with you, it's not a bad card. I mean, the 5770 and the 6770s were really good cards. But the problem with this one is like I said, is the price. It comes in at 130 quid, which is a very, healthy price. But when you compare it to the fact that you can get a 6850 cheaper, which is still a great card. I've always liked the 6850. I think for the 6000 series cards, the 6850 and the 6870s were the only cards that I actually liked. But the 6850 was cool, it was quiet, it was always been well priced, and it did play the games quite well. And the way with this is it doesn't really bring any real new technology to the table that you couldn't live without. they will say that, do you know what I mean, it can support 6 screens if the AIB, you know, decides to do it. This one, I think, out of the box, it's got a DVI, a HDMI and 2 mini display ports. Well, let's face it, you're not going to be running loads of screens on this if you're going to be using it for gaming. You're going to be struggling with a 24-inch, to be perfectly honest with you. It's better suited, in all honesty, to something around the 6850 by 1050 kind of 22-inch, or maybe even down even to a 19-inch to get decent frame rates across a range of games. It is very cool. Sorry, it is very quiet, but the temperatures we have seen kind of up into the 80s with extended benchmarking, but that's not really too much of a problem because, like I said, it does run very quiet, and we'd all much prefer a quiet rig that was slightly warmer to a rig that was loud and then slightly cooler. At least that's my preference, and it's certainly what I would suggest for you guys out there anyway. Performance wise, again, the 6850 was in front on most of it. It does get a little bit complicated when you chuck in something like a GTX 560 into the mix, because a GTX 560 will be slightly more expensive, but on the majority of the benchmarks it just completely owns it, and I mean completely ravages it. Games as well, especially when you mix PhysX in and stuff like that, the 560 is just leagues ahead. But there is a slightly, you know what I mean, you're looking at kind of 20 or 30 pounds to get a basic 560. So the way I would really go with this, it's quite a quick review, is it's got a great card, but because of the older cards are so well priced now, I would honestly say if you've got the money for this, or you are considering this, either buy a 6850, and then when your mates say, oh, I got a 7000 series card, why didn't you get a 7770? Poke them in the eye, send them to this video, and kind of explain that sometimes you go with performance rather than just the fact that you can put 7000 series something or other in your spec list. Or be brave, spend a little bit more money and get a 560, because it will completely ravage this card altogether. So what I would say is, if you want to stay with AMD, save your money, get a 6850. If you can spend a little bit more, go to Nvidia, and then not only will you get PhysX, it's still an amazing card, but then you can also join the OC3D Redline folding team and get into folding at home and start doing things for medical research, and actually start using your computer power to start doing some good in the world. Team number, by the way, is 98860. Go to the OC3D forums if you are actually interested to see what folding at home is all about. We are doing immensely well, and there's a really, really good team and community on the OC3D forums if you want to go and have a look. In fact, I will put a link to the forums underneath. But yeah, that would be my honest advice with this card, is to be perfectly honest with you, it's not really worth buying. We've given it a bronze award because it does, you know, I mean, it is a good card, but it's when you compare it to the slightly older ones and the 560 that it's just kind of like, it doesn't really fit in very well. Hopefully the 7800 series will be a different story, but this I really wouldn't bother with at all. Like I said, buy the older one or buy a 560. That would be my advice to you, in all honesty. Although it does look nice, it would look good in a LAN build or something like that, but I'd still spend my money elsewhere if it was me. The only real benefit that this thing really, really has, and it's something I should stress, and it's something I've not mentioned yet, is the low power usage. It's looking at about 80 watts for the card. So if you had a real low power system, say for argument's sake like a mini ITX case or something that had a small form factor power supply, some of those power supplies are only like 250 watts, 350 watts. You could comfortably use this card with something like that if you really, really wanted to. But like I said, I would still, for the majority of you out there that are going to be using full-size ATX power supplies and stuff like that, I would honestly say 6850 or the 560 if you've got that little bit more money and maybe a meatier power supply. But that would be where I'd spend my money. So yes, I'm going to leave this video here and say this is Tiny Tom Logan with another video for you. Out.